Right, guys, thank you so much again for meeting with us today. Again, if you guys just come in, I am Nam Tran, and here's my colleague, Chugudi.
Yeah, hi.
So today we will go into a session about how you create a custom chart in Holistics. This is a hands-on webinar, right? So just to reiterate what we talk about today, like who we should talk to today. This session is actually for holistic users, first of all, and you should have the admin role in order to actually do this action, right? If you are not an admin role, you don't worry. You can actually share this session to the admin, or you can request the role so that you can do it yourself. And secondly, of course, it is actually important that you would have some understanding of the config file language. For example, JSON file or YAML, XML, AML, stuff like that. Right. So for the outline for this session, we will go over several things. First of all, you will be able to define the fields using Holistic AML, which is our analytics modeling language that we build at Holistics. This will basically standardize the way that you do modeling in analytics, right? And secondly, you will be able to learn how to control the styling for your charts. And third, of course, you will be able to use the VegaLite, which is the open source graphical library that we integrate for template definitions. And fourth is you will be able to refactor those VegaLite templates so that it can fit to your own need. So let's step back a little bit, right? With Holistics, we have already support you with 20 core visualization. So this is the one that we actually, support internally in Holistics. And of course, for each of the visualization, you can actually see the styling, you can actually see the formatting so that you can tweak it a little bit for your the visualization that you actually fit with the use case that you have, right? However, of course, sometimes you actually just need to have that type visualization that maybe we haven't supported yet. That is the reason why we introduce the VegaLite integration. So to give it in a nutshell, basically, is that VegaLite is the high-level graphic and of the graphic, and we we use this because it's deployed as JSON syntax, which is easy for you to use. That it will help you to create the visualization in the data reporting that you need, right? As you can see, it will actually help you to build a lot of type chart. For example, if you are into statistics, you can see like some of this chart will be like more useful for you to do statistical analysis. Or if you're in logistics, map visualization is actually very important, right? So let's jump into how you can actually create this chart, right? So with this, I will transfer my session to Chukwudi over here.
Okay. Yeah. Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us on the webinar today. So I'll be taking over from Nam, and I'll be sharing with us a sample use case, and we'll sort of build up a custom chart together in Holistics. Okay. Yeah, so a hands-on use case will be a statistical comparison of categories, right? And we'll just look at three very, very simple cases, right? So the first one is an e-commerce company. You want to monitor sales performance across different markets of operations, or an agribusiness who wants to monitor and compare production outputs across multiple operational locations, right? Or say a portfolio management company, compare performance of securities in the market. So now there's lots of visualizations, but a box plot seems suitable for this. And this is not one of the native visualizations we offer in Holistics. So why a box plot, right? The issue that we're trying to see is statistical summary, and a box plot best does this for us, which means we can evaluate these summaries and compare them across these different categories. So if you take a look at this, this is a sample box plot defined with using the Vigalight templates, and this is being visualized in Holistics. And this box plot, for example, is for the e-commerce use case, showing us other values across geographical markets, right? Now, so the question now is, how can we create these visualizations in Holistics? Before I go and start up this, I would love to quickly send us a link. I say someone asked about this, so I would love to quickly send a link. So check the Q&A session. There's a link to a Google Doc page, right? That should allow us copy some of the codes up that'll be pasted there, so for us to follow along properly for this particular session, right? So it's just shared the link right now, and let me quickly paste this for us there. Okay. I'm going to paste up the code here, and we should be able to copy this code so we can easily follow along for everyone, right? Okay. So a high-level explanation, right? Just as Nam mentioned earlier on, if you're an admin on the platform, you should be able to see the settings. I'll show you step by step how this will be done later on. But first of all, go through this information before we go to a hands-on application. So you can see a place for custom chat settings, and you see that whenever you define a new chat, right, as an admin user, this becomes available for all of your business users or people who have Explore and chat building roles, right, in Holistics. The next thing is to show you a high-level overview of these templates and how it gets to materialize for your business users on their UI exploration end. So you see that we are able to define different fields here. And we see these fields get materialized as input areas for you to do your drag and drop for the different dimensions or measures you would want to work with. And the second step is to define the options. I mean, this is where I know a lot of people would find interesting. We've gotten a lot of questions about how can we do font styling, how can we change background colors and all of those things, right? So we are able to define most of these things with options. And you see that this directly influences what you see under your styles. And the last part is the step 3, which is the template definition, right? And with template definition, whatever you define here using the Vigalight library, you get to control what type of visualizations that you're able to find in Holistics. So this is an overview of the different chat properties that are available in Holistics. So let's do a quick run through for all of them. So for the fields, the first thing you're able to define multiple fields. Obviously, you have chats who will probably use one input field, some use up to 5 and all of that, right? The next thing is a label, right? And the label is optional, which is basically trying to put in a text label saying what type of field can be used there and all of that. The next one is the type, which enables us to define whether it's a dimension or it's a measure. And the good thing about there is like a best practice advice, actually. If you are using a Vigalight template that does an aggregation as part of its transformations, we advise you set all of your field types to dimensions, since Vigalight would already do the aggregation on their end. The next thing is that you have an option to set a sort order for that particular field in special cases where you may need that. And the last one is the data type. Now, one very useful place we could find this coming to play, like we have in the box plot, is that, so let's say you want to limit business users, prevent them from making the error of passing in non-number fields into a particular field type that makes use of only numbers, right? So you can set the data type to number, and this would restrict that only a number field will be accepted in that particular input session. The next thing we look at is options. So we see the label again, telling us what kind of option it is. We see the type, whether it's an input type, a number input, whether it's a toggle option. It's a radio button selection or a normal select from checkboxes, or you have a color picker in holistics. And then the next one is the options. This particular one helps us provide a list which works with areas where you want to specify a number of inputs available to your user. So let's say you have a select option and you want to specify a list of the available options, right? You can use the options. And then we also advise to put a default value so that this particular input option can take that default value even when a user doesn't go to the styling area to set it up. And the last step, as we see, is the VBeagerLite templates that we get to adopt. This is just showing you a sample syntax in holistics, right? Just showing how all of this comes together. So the first step we're going to be looking at, right, is how do we define the fields in holistics. So at this point, right, we are going to move over to a practical case, and I'll show you how we can get into the custom chart definition area so we can sort of follow along. Now, we see that for defining the fields, this particular chart for Boxplot has two fields. So we have a field A and a field B. Now, the label here reads categorical field for the first one, and the label here reads quantitative field for the second one. And we see that the categorical field listed here gets materialized for your end users, and the quantitative field listed here gets materialized for your end users. And here we set both of them to dimensions because for this particular chart type, right, so we're basically working with dimensions in the two use cases. So I'm going to switch over to the practical use case. I believe most of us would have had access to this particular links already. So if you go to your holistics homepage, right, you should be able to see at the top right corner your organization name, and you have organizational settings there. If you scroll down a bit to more settings as an admin user, you should have custom charts enabled for you. All right, so if we're going to enable custom charts, all we need to do here is that we want to build a new chart, right? So we go to add a custom chart, and we're provided with an interface to define this. So the good thing about here is that we've made this a bit intuitive, that when you're defining the particular chart name, we're able to search quickly and find out. So let's say I define a box plot, right? We see that the chart icon preview has intuitively shown us the particular icon type that we're supposed to work with, right? Here is where you can put in the description to sort of tell your users what possible use cases this chart can be used for. And you see that Holistics will naturally provide for us, right, these three-step of options we put here, which is the fields, the options, and the templates, right? So going over to the first case, which is defining the fields, we can come over to the charts I defined here. So you're able to copy out the field definition, which is this first block of code over here. I'm going to copy this and then come right here under fields and replace this entire code block with fields, right? I'm going to indent this one step backward. So we see that right here, we have two field definitions. The first one, the type is dimension, like I mentioned, label categorical. And the field B, we have type dimension. The label is reading quantitative field. All right, so with this now, we're able to define the fields. And just to show you a bit of how this feels in holistics, if I were to define a field C, right, I have a field template, and the first thing it shows me is to define the type because the other things are actually optional, right? So this could be a field C, and I'm able to define the type, define a label if I want to, and all of that, right? So I'm just going to undo this because we do not need a field C. Okay. So moving back to the next step, which I believe we are going to find interesting, right? Because this is now where we do a lot of things around fonts, colors, backgrounds, size, and all of those, right? So one interesting thing about the VBeagerLite library is that for the mark we're using, which is the box plots, we're actually giving a list of various property types which we could play around and modify in holistics, right? We are able to check extent, set maybe like the outlier scale, set orientation, size, color, opacity, all of these things. And just to show you very, very quickly how all of this comes to play, we can quickly access the VigaLite website, which is this particular website now. If you go to VigaLite and you go to examples, right, you can quickly search for box plots. Right. And if we go to see that there are various options for box plots here. And if we go quickly to the documentations, right, we see under the mark types here, we have box plots. And under this aspect, you see that VigaLite is taking time to explain to us the different options we could use to format and play around with, in quotes, right, to sort of control how we want our styling to appear. So that's how we are able to see most of these property definition options. Now, this gets really interesting at this point. Now, we see that we have a list of over 7 options defined here, and we see how they get to materialize over in Holistics. So you see that an option for tooltip to show tooltip summary of data. We see an option for increasing the box size, right? We see an option for fonts, option for box color, median color, the background color also, and the outlier scale. So what we've done here, we've done an interesting mix of the various option types in Holistics, right? So if you take a look at this option type here, we use toggle for this for show tooltip. There's a label, show tooltip, which you see here. There's default value, which is true, right? There's an issue for the box size. This is an input, and I use the label box size number inputs. This actually, one other thing I could have used there actually is to set the particular type to be a number input, right? So I can put a default value, for mine of 5, or you can take any value you want. Now, one other interesting thing too we have is the fonts. So you see we're able to like now define our own fonts. We have a lot of users who have asked us this question over and over again. How can we change our fonts and modify our own unique fonts, right? So this is how you do it. You can define an option font, and the type is the select type. And we see what I talked about now with the options here, right? Because you are able to set in a list of various font types you want your users to be able to pick from. And then the default value we set here is monospace, right? So all of this applies to the same thing. The box color we set in the color picker. Now, this is actually very interesting now because in Holistics, as an admin, so you're able to set in wide arrays of colors probably available to your organization, right? You can set in your own default colors. And those color settings you do in Holistics get available to your end user, right? To be able to pick from those default colors you've set and all of these options. We now see one interesting thing too that we've done here with the background colors. This also is select. So maybe you have an organizational color theme, right? Maybe you have like 4 types of colors you make use of in your organization. You can put in those colors in different code formats here. We've seen that this is a hex format for this. And then you also have an RGB format, and you also have the ability to pass in the color as a string directly, right? And then you have this also at the outlier scale for those who want to manipulate the statistical properties of that particular chart. All right, so if you go over to the link I have shared with us, we should see that there's a place we have the options. So you just need to go there and copy out most of these options we've defined for you already, right? And then I copy this, Control C, and then I come to the chart definition templates. So I'm able to replace this code block for options, right? And do a Control V right here. And I indent this last curly brackets to align with this options line here, right? So with this, we see that we have been able to define these options values in Holistics. And the next step now becomes even more interesting because now we learn how we can easily go to VigaLite, copy sample templates that are available there, and actually adjust these templates to suit the Holistics integration. So this is an example of a VigaLite templates definition in Holistics. And if I go over to the VigaLite library, real quick, we can see that if I go to the examples for this, right, and I go down here to where we have box plots, the array of different box plot properties, right, I can open up this particular example that has been defined, and I see this template here. If I zoom into this a bit so that we can have better visual experience, right? So you can see these different templates here. I can easily copy out this, right? Paste it in Holistics and modify it easily. So if you go over to what I have here, we see that this is the same charts definition template we have from Vigalites over here in Holistics, right? So now there are some easy steps we are going to follow to get this done. And I'm going to make this practical at this point so that we can actually adopt these Vigalites templates and define and pass in holistic values into it. I want us to do this step by step, right? So I'm going to go over to this point and copy right. I'm going to go over to this point and copy this particular definition. So we can ignore the first and the second one. I'm going to paste this on that particular Google Doc we have. So after this page, because this is not part of the code, I'm just going to paste it somewhere down here. Mind you, the template definition we have here is already a finished product, right? But I want us to build this together so we see how this works directly in Holistics. So I'm going to copy this schema from here, do Control-C, and I go over to my box plot settings. And right here, if I enter, I move to the next indentation line, right? I'm able to paste this, right? One thing we notice here quickly is that this happens normally when you copy and paste most of this JSON syntax, right? It sort of indents backward by a step. So I'm going to copy from this last one, right, down up to where I have description and use a tab to indent all of this back properly into what I want. So at this point now, right, we're going to go back and forth through all of those steps I've mentioned to be able to see how we are able to adapt this Vigalites template definition to suit all of these options and fields we've passed here, right? Because the aim of defining all of these fields to Holistics is that you want to be able to inject them into these templates. So which means you're able to control how the templates get rendered in the final visualization, right? So I'll go over to our slide showing us the different steps. Really, really easy steps here, right? So the first one is that because we are not, we're going through Holistics, we're going to have to delete the lines containing schema and description because Holistics automatically handles that for us, right? And then the next step is to define our data by pointing to the values in Holistics. Now I'll show you how the fields we've defined now becomes important to us at this particular case. So we'll go over to our chart definition point. And like I mentioned, we want to delete these two lines, the lines containing description and schema. So I'm going to delete this. Right. And then the next step says we should point our data definition to the values itself. So how do we do this, right? This is basically using string interpolation, right? For those who are familiar with this particular concept. But this is really easy. If you notice here now, all we need to pass in for this particular step, right? And I'm going to also like restructure this syntax because I do not like defining mine as a list. I want it broken down into different steps, but any way you do it still works, right? I'm going to have my double curly brace first of all set here. And if I press enter, I'm able to go down to the next indentation line. So now the first thing is that I want to pass in the values. And using this string interpolation, like I mentioned, we just pass at, open the curly brace and pass in values. So what this does now is that when Holistics executes the query against your data warehouse and fetches those values, right, we're able to pass in that data here at this point directly to Vigalites to build out your visualizations, right? So going over, this is the first step. We've been able to do step 1 and step 2. So the next step now is, where necessary, we should replace hard-coded values of variables and inputs, like what's the X axis going to read these values from? What will the Y axis read the values from? How are we define the size? How have we defined color and all of this? You can hard code this, right? But this sort of forfeits the essence of being able to make this flexible for us. So we want to be able to point those holistic definitions to this particular template, right? So, and an example is this Y axis field you've seen here, where we are able to replace this with the field labels we've passed in. So I'm going to go over to the chart definition aspects and show us practically how this can be achieved. All right, so the first step for us here, I'm going to work with the encoding first and then come back up to the point of the mark. Right. So the first step here is that we see that for the X axis, I'm going to rework this a bit because I told you, like I said, I do not like having this on the same line. So I want to indent mine backward and also take the type and take it down. Right. And then take this down, this. All right. So I just prefer having mine in this manner. You can leave it in that way, right? What is important is that you pass in the values in the correct method. So the first thing we notice here is that the field here is defined as species, which is most likely a dimension name from the particular data set that was used as an example in VigaLite. But we don't want to work with this. So on our X-axis, we have the categorical field. So we want that whatever our users pass in as a categorical field, that particular dimension should be what Holistics reads and feeds to that particular visualization. So that is currently called here as field A. Our categorical field is called field A here. So using the same string interpolation method, right, we are able to come here and I am going to delete this hard-coded species value, for example, and pass at and open a double curly brace and I say fields, right, dots, what we named that particular field block, which is A, and then do dots, the name, right? So a field has that attribute name as what we've named that. The next thing is that we want to pass in the particular type, right? And in this case for VigaLite, they have an option for nominal or ordinal. We can leave this hard-coded, right? Because we don't want it to be this way. But however, we can also create an option for this. We'll probably come back to it as one way to refactor this, but let's leave this for now as nominal. And the next step we do, let's apply this same logic to what we have here in the Y variable, right? And luckily enough, this is already formatted in the proper way I prefer it, right? So for the field, the same way we passed in the field A.name, you see that for our Y-axis, this is where we have the quantitative field, which is field B. So we can just quickly come down here and do the same string interpolation at, open the double curly brace, fields.b.name, right? And the type here, right, we leave it as quantitative, and we are leaving the scale as 0 and 4. So we don't touch any of these things for now, right? Now, this is now where I want us to look at the interesting part, which is styling. This is very, very important, right? So the first styling option we want to work with is the color. If we notice in VigaLite, right, they've done their styling by passing in a particular field name. So these are two different options. If you notice on the code you have on that particular link, I have commented out field, type, and legend under the color styling. This is because if you do this, if you have a categorical field of very distinct values, right, VigaLite would automatically give you varying colors for each of the box plot boxes. But in most cases, we mostly want our box plots to be the same color, right? So I've said to comment that out, which means in this, and to comment out in the holistics, all we need to do, right, is to put out double forward slashes like this, right? So if we do this, we have this commented out, and we have this commented out, right? However, we want to be able to define a color. If you go to Vigalites templates, you'll see that one of the things you can pass into the color is the value of the color. So just the value. This makes it easier, which means now we want to pass in the value. We don't want to hard code. If you go up here, right, we have an option we've defined here as box color. Take a look at this. Define this option as box color. So the same way we do the string interpolation, right? We just come in here now and put our double curly brace. Sorry, first of all, do the at, pass in the double curly brace, and we'll say options dot the object name we've given it, which is box color, right? Dot value. Right, this is very, very unique, right? So options dot box color dot value, which means whatever value your business users pick or pass in for this box color option, in this case, we set the default to be teal, you are able to have that pass to Vigalites right here. So that's all for the color, right? The next thing we want to play around with, right, is the mark, right? Here, this particular example we've worked with just shows us a mark for the type, which is a box plots. The extent here is default as min max, but we want ours to be unique, right? So I'm just going to do 1 or 2 and then copy and paste the remaining one so as to save us on some time here. So if we look at the extent here now, we've set that we want our extent option to be from the outlier scale, right? So do we want to pass in 1.5 or do we want to pass in min max, right? I left this as input again because this is going to probably take a string input or a number input. So I don't want to limit this. And in my own little wisdom, right, I've sort of indicated here that this can accept min max as an input, just a way of telling my business users that you guys can type in min max at that particular point. So the same way I've done the string interpolation, right? I'm able to create an at, the double curly brace, and I say options dot outlier scale dot value, right? And then I close this, I have a comma. Now the next thing I want to be able to set for this mark type, if you go to the mark type on documentations, you see the different things you can actually achieve with the mark type. Next thing I want to set here is tooltip. So I'll say tooltip, right? And then I want to pass in the values. So I do at, and notice up here we are defined an options for tooltip, which is whether should we toggle it, should it be true or should it be false, right? So I'm just going to put here options dot tooltip dot value. So in the same way, we have all of that being defined, right? Now, quickly, one other option we want to use for our encoding. Now, this is under encoding, right? We want to be able to encode by color and also by size. Size is not contained in the default one, so I want to be able to pass in my box plot sizes. If we do not do this, Vigalites will have a default size for all your boxes, right? So right here, I can just go to one of these guys and press enter. I go to the next line. And then I have here, sorry. Yeah, on this particular indentation line, I have here, I want to define the size. So the size and then the value. So the same way we had color and had value for color, that's the same way we have size, and then the value for size would be string interpolation again at options, right, dot box size. So that's one of the options we are defined up there, box size dot value, right? We need to put in the comma here so that it counts as part of this list. And we see all of this taken care of. Sorry, I need to put in at this step. a double curly brace. I remove this. All right. So this is basically a way you can pass in most of these things, right? Now, one other thing I took up, and that's one of the things you can set up for your visualizations on a general way, is the config. Now, if we choose to render this particular visualization like this, right, the template would basically pass in and use defaults, background colors, and all of those things. But we have this opportunity to actually modify things like fonts, background colors, and all, which means we want to set a configuration itself for the charts. And in Vigalites, how that can be achieved, right, is by using the config setting, right? And if you take a look at the config settings, it's present on that particular code I shared to you. We can come and put it under here. Mind you, the order of placing these things do not matter. It will basically be rendered in the same way. That's one beauty of the of this particular language types, right? So you can render it in any manner. There's no order for it. So for the config, we see that we're able to set in things like fonts, the background, right? And whether it should auto size it to the particular window it's working with. So all of these are various ways we're able to modify and pass in Vigalites template, right? I'm just going to go back to this code block and copy out my already defined template. So just copy from data and copy this all the way down to this curly brace that has 2 semicolons after it. So Control C, and then I come into this and just replace all of this. I just replace this from data up to this double curly brace that has the double commas, right? So if I paste this, I should have my chart defined properly. I need to indent this. Right, awesome, works fine. All right, so with this now, right, we have our charts already defined. All right, so there's an option, right, which is basically you can explore more Vigalites functions to refactor your charts for flexibility, right? And if you noticed, I mentioned that we could, if you go to the Vigalites library, go to the Vigalites library and you go to sorry. All right, so if you go to the Vigalites library, which we can see here, and you go to documentations, right? There's a whole lot of options we can explore here. So the beauty of this is that on the part of holistics, you have fields and options. And we've given you a host of capacity to be able to modify most of these things, right? Now, how far you go with defining very complex charts is also relatively dependent on how far you explore this particular documentation here for Vigalites. Trust me, lots of interesting things to actually find out in this particular aspect, right? So optional, right, we are able to modify most of those settings, right? Now, I mentioned that I was going to come back to this one, which is the type, right? Whether it's nominal or ordinal. Now, for our box plots, there is a chance that what you have on the x-axis, the categorical stuff, could actually be an ordinal stuff, right? So which means if we want to dynamically modify this particular type, all we need to do is go to options, one of the places in options, go and create a new option right here. right? And maybe I call it X type or something, right? You just give any name to this. Open a double curly brace, enter. I press type. The type should be a select type, right? And then the label, I'm going to call this X type, just for the sake of this particular session, right? And then because I'm using a select, right, I have to set in options, which is a list of different things. So maybe we have nominal, which is what we have here, this one. So nominal, or then maybe we probably call this an ordinal type, right? All right, so the next thing we do is that we need to set in a default value. So you see that we've actually made our chart interactive. If there's an error in what you're working on, so let's say I delete this particular default value line, right? You would see an error pop up for this. And if you go to that error, it shows you that property default value is missing. So we've built it to be able to track what you're doing and prompt you on areas where you need to make changes or corrections. So passing default value here, and then I want default value to be nominal. Right, which means I can now go to where I have this type here, and instead of hard coding type, I can go here and say at, and I do options dots. I called mine X type, the value. Sorry. Let me check that this is working properly. All right, sorry. So there's an error there. Like I mentioned, it will only show you an error. An error here is because I was supposed to use an underscore here, not that. All right, so this basically shows you how you can manipulate all of these things and pass in very, very unique values to them. So we kill the hard coding and make it a bit more interactive, right? So now with this now, we've reached the end of this particular chart definition, right? And we are able to see in holistics, right, that we use the holistics AML definitions, right? We've been able to go through all of these 4 steps, define using AMQL, define options, adapt Vega-like templates, explore more options for this, right? So I know a lot of people will be asking, right, for those who probably do not want to go through building most of these charts themselves, we've taken out the time to contribute to our public repo, right? So you can go into all of these folders here and just literally copy and paste into your definition template, right? Including fields, options, and templates that's already been packaged together. You can paste it in and you have your charts defined. So just to take a look at some of the sample ones, this is a table heat map. And if you look at this side, we see that this codes have already been written for us and defined. So just literally copy this entire code, paste it on your end, and you should have a chart like this open to you. So you have this sample bubble plots. Same thing, we have all of this, right? So we can go over to our chart definition, and then I'm just going to modify this back because I do not want to make use of this option X. All right, great. So all we need to do now, we've defined our chart successfully, right? We just need to go in to this point and submit. And if there are no errors, we should have our box plots created, right? For my own case, because I have previous box plots created, I want to rename this to box plots v3 just for sake of nomenclature, right? So I can resubmit this. I know that this is my new box plot that I've created, right? So now we could build together one very, very test visualization in Holistics and play around with these options we've set so that we see how these things work. So if I go back to my reporting site, right, I can go to one of these data sets I have here. And real quick, I select this third box plot option because this is box plot V3 that we just defined together now, right? I select the option. I see that I have categorical field here. I have quantitative field. The categorical field I want to use here is to use the continent name, right? So I pass this in here, right? And then I go into the orders model and I pass in which of these fields I want to work with. That's a dimension. All right, so probably the order quantities, right? So I pass in the quantity here. And I see that this chart gets automatically built in for me. So let's play around a couple of things. Let me expand this and let me expand this a bit. Good. So let's go into the styling options and play around with a couple of stuff. So the first thing I want to do, let's say I want to increase the box size, change this to 60. You see the box size increases. I can change this to say 100. Increases, right? I can even use 200, but let's not increase it too much so that it does not, right? So we can basically modify all of this. We can select from the fonts. We notice that we have monospace, I have sans serif, for example. It changes the font name, the font display. You can see that changes it. The box color, right? The default I used was teal, but you can see that because we use the color picker, right? We're able to set in different color options here for this particular box plot, right? I can probably even make this color if I wanted, right? The median color, which is for this mark here, I can change it from this to this color or maybe a lighter color, right? However I want to do this. And interestingly, also the chart background from white, I have these different options that I had predefined, right? This chart gets a bit colorful, but just for practical cases, right? Yeah, and then the outlier value, we can use either the 1.5 or like I mentioned, we can input min max as an option, right? So you can probably set it to 1.3, 1.4. This particular is reserved to people who understand what they are trying to set in that particular aspect, right? And then we see this beautiful chart has been built for us, and I can easily save as. Say I wanted to play around with this and share with my workmates. I go to my private workspace, right? And save this here. The title is demo box plots. Sorry. Demo box plots. Save this. And I should have this particular reports now available for me under this particular dashboard. Okay. Yeah, so at times you may need to resize this to be able to display well. This is mostly because the box size we use are actually a lot. So I'm going to resize this and reposition it somewhere here. All right, so we see our sample box plot defined, right? And we're able to expand this to get a clearer view of the particular plots, right? So with this, we come to an interesting end of this session of how to build charts in Holistics. So as a fun exercise, right? After this particular webinar, we'll be opening up a conversation on our community. So we can go in there to the community. We'd love to see what charts to build, really. I'm sure that a lot of us are already buzzing to build wonderful custom charts, right? So go into the community, share with us what you've built. Let's hear and see what others have to say about your charts, right? And we'll also try our best to upload some of the things we build on our Git repo and also on the community pages. And if you have particular questions about either this webinar or pertaining to the custom charts, right? You can also post it under that particular section we will create and send the link across to everyone. And we'd love to continue this discussion, right? So that we probably give both participants and those who are not able to make it here the ability to learn more from this. All right. Over to you, Nam.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. So yeah, for this for the continuation of the session, you can actually click on the raise hand button. So from there we will unmute you, so you can actually ask any question that you have. I see, like, in our chat. Well, okay. Well, thank you so much. I think Team and Nora actually asked, like, what is the GitHub repo that you share before, Judy? Wondering if you can actually share that to the public, maybe after the call. Right. All right. Do you guys have any question? Chugudi, you are muted, by the way.
All right. Yeah. So I'll paste this in chat to reply to that particular question, right? And then I would also take steps. We would send out an email after this webinar for the webinar recording, and every other detail we feel will be necessary for you to practice this on your own. But I'm going to paste this particular link. Can you please share? So that's from, okay. So type answer. Right, so I've replied to that question and I've sent it. Yep. So yeah, the repo is actually public, right? So you can also contribute to our repo. We are open to having wonderful definitions from our community.
Yeah. So I have, like, a question from Craig Wilson. He wants to ask, like, will we be opening up to the, like, creating and changing the charts for non-admins? So first of all, thank you so much for the question. It's a valid question, and we will get back to you over email. But basically, we think that because this is one of the functionality where you actually, change the core of how you build a visualization, that's actually better for the admin to be able to do it. However, of course, we will discuss more if the use case is actually valid for us. All right.
Okay.
Yeah. So Nikhil have a question. What are the most used chart from VegaLite apart from BoxPlot?
Okay, so let me take that now. So I'm going to paste a link to the VegaLite examples, right? So let me quickly share my screen again. Okay, if we take a look at this particular examples gallery, right, you have a wide host of visualization options here. It's really crazy. Like, it's a whole lot of visualization options, from histograms to scatter plots to line charts that are modified, right? You have area, stream segments, table-based plots, donut chart. I mean, a lot of people ask for donut charts a lot. I mean, as against pie charts, right? And then you also have this waterfall charts here, right? You have parallel coordinate plots, right? And so a whole lot. So there's basically endless possibilities. And then you could also join online community forums where these templates are being shared and discussed regularly. So the simple thing here is that you can actually work smart, right? We want to look for a template that has already been defined, copy it into Holistics and adapt it to work. Very, very simple steps. Yeah, so that's it on my end. I'm over to you.
All right, thank you. I see Juan Sarmiento have a question of, like, okay, in setting, I don't have a custom charts. I'm the admin. I will email you about this issue, maybe because the account you have might not be on the pricing plan that actually offer it. So I will look into it for you and we'll get back to you, okay? All right. Marcus have a question about when will you support trellis charts, small multiples? Can you help me with that, Chukwudi? Again, you are muted.
Yeah, sure. So so for the trellis chart, right, we've actually had an internal discussion about this, and we believe there is a community post that's actually actively handling and sharing updates on the trellis charts, right? So whenever we have a more concrete updates with the timeline, we'll be able to get across to you. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, over to you.
So, sorry. Go ahead. You ready? Okay.
No, yeah, I'm done. Over to you.
Got it. So Hamza asks, I see how you change the color of the chart. Can we change the color of the table too? For example, can we change the background color of the header? So the header, you mean the header of the report, is that correct, Hamza?
Yeah, so let me quickly check and show you something. All right. So let me attend to Hamza's question, right? So Hamza, if you look at this, what I mentioned about the config earlier on, let me quickly zoom into this. This is actually a Stack Overflow stuff for fonts, but we're going to use this to answer to your question, right? If you look at this config, the config we did was on a basic level of certain fonts. You can even set an individual font of a y-axis. You can set the individual fonts for x-axis. You can set table headers. You can actually set out the background colors for tables. So everything depends on your deep understanding of the basic building blocks of data visualization. So those who are very familiar with the concepts of axis, figures, and all of this in things like Seaborn and Matplotlib on the core should be able to relate to what I'm talking about, right? Which is you can actually tear apart the building block structure of this chart and style it the way you want upward. So I don't know if I was able to answer your question, Hamza.
All right. All right. Thank you, Hamza.
All right, sure.
Any other questions before we conclude the meeting? All right. Well, thank you so much, you guys, for having us today. And yeah, we will post this on the internet, probably maybe our community. So follow up. If you have any question, I think Marcus actually have another question. Are you using Vega Lite internally as chat engine or just for custom chat? So the answer here is that we actually just use it for the custom chat. We actually have a team to actually build our own, setting for and like any kind of native chart that we have. Right.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, guys, and have a great day, great night. And I will follow up with you guys after the call.
Yeah. So thank you guys. Have a nice day. And TGI if it's Friday.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.